going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. And this is our, I guess, back to weekly show. I forgot our intro again the first time we shot this, where we review the Magic stories.
Blooper reel.
We've got a couple of those at this point. I mean, we've been doing the show long enough, right? And this week, we are back for another Streets of New Capenna main story review with Episode 4, The Font, by Elise Kova. My quick review at the top is, I thought this was a good story. Of course, there are things about the story that make me upset, but that's because of the content of the story. And so I think a story that makes you feel something is a good thing, even if it's a negative feeling or like being upset. I'm not angry like I've been in the past where it's like, that characterization was terrible. I'm angry because I'm like, I liked that person and now they're dead. Right. So that's a good thing. That means that character was written well and it was done well. So for that reason, I think it's a great story, and I think it's definitely worth people's time to read it.
I think it's a great story for completely different reasons. It's a great story because it really follows the trauma through line in a big way.
The biggest way.
Yeah, in a way that none of these other stories have even come close to doing.
Yeah.
I think Joe said that this is the story that we've written the most notes about.
So far, yeah. Yeah, which, I mean...
And did you mean from New Capenna, or did you mean in history?
Possibly ever. Yeah.
Yeah,
possibly ever. So, we will see what that means in terms of how long this video is going to be. I'm going to try my best. It doesn't always work, but I will do everything that I can. So.
Yeah, and I'll try to be I'll try not to explain things too much, especially if it's stuff that we've talked about in other episodes of JaAR. I'll just try to, like, make those comparisons and then move on, just to try and, like, get through this episode in a timely manner.
But hey, we've got a lot to say. We will obviously get onto the full review itself, but in order to make this video unnecessarily longer, we do have our shameless plug of the week. That's actually not that shameless. We really appreciate you all being here. Please don't forget, if you're enjoying the things that we're doing, if you enjoy this series, if you enjoy our openings or our streams, please, please, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, or, as I alluded to, whenever we go live on stream every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this channel. This past Monday, right, we did, a couple weeks ago, we did the early access event for Streets of New Capenna on MTG Arena, sponsored by Wizards of the Coast, and thank you again to Wizards for that honor and privilege. But we played 15 hours of Streets of New Capenna on Arena and never got more than 6 wins, ever. Let alone, 7 wins and 1 loss, 2 losses, whatever. No. Only 6 wins and then 3 losses was our best record. We got that once out of the... We played 50-something games of Magic that day, I think I recorded. But anyway. Yeah, so... but this past Monday, we got our first, possibly ever, 7-0 sealed deck.
Yes.
That VOD is up on the channel, but mainly what I'm trying to say is on Mondays we play Magic the Gathering Arena. And it is almost exclusively limited. Occasionally there might be something else here and there. Right. But if you're interested in seeing whatever the newest limited format is, Mondays are your night, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on this channel when we go live. The other thing we did this past Monday was we discussed what we were going to be doing this Friday, because we also stream on Fridays from 8 to 10 p.m. But Fridays we do video games, whatever random video game we happen to be playing at the time. And we had just finished last week X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse, which meant that this Friday we needed a new game to play. And last Friday, we had asked some people their opinions. We got some votes in from folks, because we'd given a couple of options. And the decision that was come to by majority vote was that this Friday, so the day after this video comes out, and if you're watching this a few weeks from now, we are probably still playing it, so don't worry, you can come join us.
Right.
But Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, from now until we are done, we are going to be doing our first ever Nuzlocke of Pokemon Fire Red. If you are unfamiliar with a Nuzlocke, come join us.
Yeah.
You will find out. We will explain the rules. If you come in late and you want to ask about the rules, we are more than happy to explain them again. Don't you worry. So we would love to have you there. Please feel free to do so. Don't forget as well, we have other channels, links down in the description box below. The VODs of those Nuzlocke games will be going up on Video Games for All, link in the description down below, and we have videos over on Gluten Free for All as well.
Right.
That Amy over here does a fantastic job of doing gluten-free cooking, gluten-free food reviews, both gluten-free cooking and food reviews.
Sometimes vegan stuff as well.
Lactose-free almost always, but not definitively always. So really, really good stuff over there as well. So you should definitely check those out. Like I said, down in the description box below. And last but not least, before we get started, if you have not read this story for yourself, if our quick reviews, I usually mention this before we do the shameless plug, but I was so excited about Pokemon, so I apologize. It's just going to be so interesting to me. I'm like super anxious about it, but also excited. But if you are interested to read this story for yourself and you have not gotten a chance to do so, and that quick review from us spurred you on to wanting to read it for yourself, or you want to follow along or whatever, the top link in the description down below will take you to that story, because we want to remove as many barriers as possible. We want you to be able to go out and read that story for yourself, because again, we thought it was a good one. We will do our best to let you know what's going on at any given moment and summarize the story, but we can't do the author's words justice, even when we are flat out reading some of the quotations for you, because you're missing all of the full context. So we encourage you to do that if that is something that interests you. So, are we cool? On to the full review itself. We start...
Take a deep breath.
Yeah. Basically, this story is a story of two moments. Or it's two locations, really. The museum and the crescendo. Technically, at the end, they're on the streets, but that's the epilogue, essentially.
Right.
So we go back and forth from the museum to the crescendo and back and forth. At the museum, we have Xander and we have Angelo. Angelo is only there for a hot second and then he's gone. But Xander is there for almost the entirety of the time that we're at the museum. And damn it. Xander... God, I'm like, Angelo's only there for a minute, it doesn't matter. But let's talk about Angelo. Anyway, Xander is there, and Xander's arc here is fantastic. They did an amazing job. We had heard about Xander, or heard from Xander previously, and gotten an inkling of who he was. Nothing crazy, but we got some snippets of him as his character, etc. But both of us, I think, were drawn to his story here because it kind of starts with him being super introspective in terms of walking around his museum. He's being nostalgic, or actually being able to appreciate some of his pieces. You know, I'm sure when he walks around there, he's just doing a lot of business sometimes, so he's not really able to be focused on oh, this beautiful piece that I love so much. And so the piece that he mentions that he is looking at is a sculpture of an angel holding a babe, right? A baby, whatever. But, and he said it's his favorite piece, and it makes him think of his mother. But then he reiterates that he wishes he remembered anything about her. And that made us go back, because a few episodes ago, in fact, I guess it was episode 3, Tests, when he's talking to Elspeth, and mentions that because of his age, right, being a vampire and a demon means he lives for a very long time. That's just how that works.
Right.
And that, time, right, combined with the contract that he signed to become that demon, messing with his memories, he has very little to no memory of things that occurred prior to that contract signing. So... not remembering his mother, wishing that he could remember his mother. That's really sad.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it makes him very kind of introspective. But, I don't know if you wanted to interject here, or if you want me to just kind of keep going. With that Xander section.
No, just keep going. I think I could probably, just say something at the end that kind of puts everything together, maybe.
Not a problem at all. So, the other thing that first of all, I wanted to write down, or I did write down, he adorned himself with golden claws, like in advance of the crescendo or whatever, like to get like dressed up. God bless you. I saw it coming. Do you want one? Do you want me to pass it to you? We have tissue slightly off screen over here. Anyway, let me know if that changes. He's wearing golden claws, and I was like, why isn't that more of a thing? Like, why can't I wear golden claws? Where do they sell those?
You can.
Probably. I probably couldn't pull it off like he could, though. I'm not an immortal vampire.
That's true. They have those things they're like rings, but they're like fingernails as well, and they're like made of metal. So okay. It could be like that.
Something to look into, I suppose. I just find it fascinating. Like, that seems awesome. I would love that. Why can't that be jewelry? Like,
pull that off.
Like, why can't that be standard jewelry for a guy? I just love it. I think it's great. So anyway, then we get to, like, even before they flat out say it, that he knows, you can tell based on the story or how it's being written that Xander knows this is his final time in this museum. This is his last night alive. He's dying tonight. And it's hard to tell, I think you brought this up, but it's hard to tell whether he knows, like, he just senses that he's dying, or, like, that he's gonna die, or that it's because he knows that the adversary is in the building.
Right.
And that some of his people are turning on him.
Or at the very least, he knows that the adversary is likely going to move against him tonight.
Right, especially with the crescendo being what it is, like, that it's coming and the font is a thing and blah, blah, blah.
Maybe he got a tip or whatever.
Yeah.
Also, you know, to specifically say it's happening.
Right. Who knows? And it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, they really don't make you certain of that.
Right.
I think they kind of want you to speculate. So. Yeah.
But it was, I mean, again, it just was such a cool moment to give him. Because, like, you know, we hear in this story that Jetmir was gravely wounded. But we've only had, like, a line or two from Jetmir, right? We saw the grandfatherly interaction between him and Ginny in that one story, maybe the first story, I think it was. And that's it. So, like, Jetmir means very little to us, and all of the other leaders mean even less, because we've heard less from them. Xander is the one of the 5 leaders that we've gotten the most from, and we'll talk about it later, but, you know, I guess because we know him the most, he is the one who gets, like, he's the one who we would probably most be impacted by if he were, I don't know, murdered on a rooftop or something.
Nah.
In very brutal fashion.
Not gonna happen.
Anyway, not gonna happen.
It can't happen twice.
Yeah, it was very oddly specific. Yeah. Oh, man. So then we move from there. The first time we transition, we move from the museum to the crescendo, which there was like a half a moment, maybe I read this wrong. Xander mentions that it's the eve of the crescendo. If it's the eve of the crescendo, does that imply that it's the evening of the crescendo?
Yeah.
Or that it's the eve of the crescendo, like how Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve are the day before?
No.
Okay. Because again, that was what I thought of at first, and then the next thing I know, it's like, oh, well, the adversary's forces are both attacking at the same time kind of a thing, or like revealing themselves at the same time, and it's like, no, they're not. That's the night before. Anyway, so yes, it's just the same evening. Got it.
You know, it's vampire talk.
It's vampire talk. That's Transylvanian. Anyways, that's fine. So yes, we're here with the Cabaretti, with Elspeth, with Ginny, with JaAR, etc. And so this is kind of where Amy gets to jump in a fair bit here. Okay. The first quote that we wrote down was from Elspeth looking at Ginny and JaAR's relationship / interactions with one another. Mm-hmm. And the quote reads, you want me to just go with the quote and then you'll respond to it? Yeah, I figured. She'd think it, she being Elspeth, and it being the relationship. She'd think it sweet and sisterly, if not for the perpetual discomfort that radiated off the young woman. Again, the young woman being JaAR.
Right. So she makes reference to the fact that Ginny coddles JaAR because she doesn't understand the relationship, which she explicitly says. She learns later more about the relationship, enough to be able to determine, probably more realistically, that it's not that she's coddling her, it's that she's, one, protecting her because she's a valuable asset, and two, treating her as though she's a child, even though she's older than that at this point, because that's what abusers do. They will strip you of your ability to feel like you can do things without them. Because that's important to them, because if they can't control you, what will they ever do? So...
Well, and it'll come up later, so I don't want to like spoil anything that you're going to talk about, but I also know that through discussions that we've had and things that we've read or listened to together, that another thing that abusers tend to do is make it so that they look squeaky clean at all times, not just to you, but to others on the outside as well, so that folks don't get to say, like, hey, what are you doing over there? Like, so that if it's brought up, like, hey, I'm not really comfortable in this situation, like, what are you talking about? So-and-so is amazing. Why would that be a problem?
Okay. There's a point much later where
that's what
I feel like that applies more than here, but I can see where you're going with it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good for that one. We'll move on to the next thing. So then we get JaAR finally revealed as the font, which, if you played the cards, you know that, if you've come across JaAR at all, because she's called JaAR Font of Hope or whatever. Like, that's the name on her card. But she's revealed as the font. Okay, so I wrote here, apparently only people who don't need Halo are capable of seeing past it to notice that they could kill JaAR trying to extract it from her. Like, all of them are just looking at her and they're like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like, she's going to give us all this Halo. And they're all cheering and stuff. Okay, the line is here, so I guess we'll quote it and you can talk about it as well. There was something, a metaphor that I wanted to bring up, but I'll read the quote. The crowd erupted with cheers. These people saw a resource, a tool, a solution to a problem plaguing them. All Elspeth saw was an exhausted and trapped young woman. Their new era would come at the cost of JaAR's life.
Yeah. What a impactful paragraph. Realistically, what an impactful sentence at the end of that paragraph.
Yep.
Yeah. Because it's... we're using this person. And in reality, for the most part, I won't say all the time, but for the most part, because if you're a drug dealer, then this doesn't apply. But for the most part, when you're an abuser who's using somebody, you're not using them to the point of actually physically killing them. But it's a good metaphor or a good comparison to killing them emotionally and psychologically. That's it.
Okay. The way that I wrote it, right, saying that apparently only people who don't need Halo, meaning Elspeth in this case, right? Elspeth is the only one who seems to be like, does nobody else see the issue here? Like the huge glaring problem that like
They don't get
you're gonna wring out this sponge, all that halo's gonna come out, and then that sponge is gonna be all withered and you're never gonna be able to use it again.
I don't care.
Right. And perfectly fine. I understand that. I think my thing is it just makes more sense to me that like if you foster her as like a living being, that like if she can do that for you and then she gets exhausted afterwards, you'd think that like you would take care of her and like build her back up again so that she can then give you more of it. And like you know what I mean?
Put her on a throne, feed her grapes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, is this nourishing enough for you?
Let her recuperate. Like treat her as if she were, I don't know, an angel or something, a goddess, you know, something like that. But no, it's just, holy shit, we can get this stuff out of her. Get every last drop you can right now because we need it right now. Like the concept of the future or patience or whatever is not in any of their vocabularies. But I wrote, that Elspeth being the only one that is able to see past that. I was like, I feel like there's a capitalism metaphor here somewhere that like, it's like...
It's an empires of human history metaphor.
Sure. Power and greed and all that, and you know.
Before empires really existed, which used to be a thing, I promise.
This is how it's always been, everybody. That's it. There's no other choice.
You didn't live with this constant scarcity mentality of there's not enough resources to go around, of the emperor is going to do any and all things possible to traumatize their people in order to keep them under their thumb. And that's absolutely the location that we're at.
Yeah.
It's that type of place, right?
Mm-hmm. Seems that way, at least. I mean, like
just like any other in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
For the most part, I'm not gonna speak for all nations or anything like that, but you know, time and time again, that's the way people act. When in reality, taking the time to feed what needs to be fed, and I'm not just speaking about feeding a girl who needs nourishment, I'm also talking about positive energy and, you know, the environment and things like that. Instead of feeding negative things, sorry, I feel like I'm gonna sneeze again. If you're constantly living in that scarcity mentality where your basic needs are never met, then you're always focused on that, right? And I keep doing this pyramid thing with my hands because Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But if your needs aren't being met, then you're always going to be living with that mentality. And first and foremost of importance to you is going to be fixing those things. And we would all love to think, right, that that would never be at someone's expense, or it would never at least cost them their life. But it does, frequently, all the time. So taking away that element of being in that mindset that you can never actually have what you need in life. And it's partially a mindset, and it's partially a societal certainty, right? Because empires or civilizations are designed that way to put people into those situations on purpose to keep them under someone's control. Because they wouldn't remain under your tyrannical control if they could take care of themselves and they experienced love and abundance all the time. Then they would have no need for you and your bullshit. So in this situation, it's a perfect parallel to a lot of things in this world. You know, let's burn down the rainforests because it will improve our economy.
Yeah, we want to build things there, despite the fact that, you know, we don't need oxygen. Who needs that? No. Humans don't.
Or, you know, animal ecosystems, or, you know.
It's not like we use those for our own food, and as long as you keep that ecosystem going, it'll keep producing for you. Now, just burn it all down.
Right, exactly. So, yes, the concept of fostering the things that you want to live on and continue to provide for you in a sustainable manner makes perfect sense. It's just not typical, unfortunately, anymore. And I hope and I pray that modern civilization is taking a turn back toward that, with hopefully enough knowledge of or at least like just being able to stand far back enough to see that. But, you know, that's a conversation for another time.
So, then we go back to, JaAR is revealed as the font, a ton of people, like Elspeth is horrified, and then, hey, by the way, lots of people want control of that, so fighting. Anyway, and chaos.
Right.
Then we go back to the museum. Speaking of fighting and chaos, Xander is a man that stands alone, essentially, against people who used to be loyal to him, as well as Obnixilis, the adversary himself, who, by the way, I noted, they don't mention Obnixilis, the name Obnixilis, until the last visit to the museum in the story after Xander's dead. Like, Xander's dead, we go back to Elspeth, then we go back to the museum. That's when it says Obnixilis, because now it's being told from his perspective. When it was being told from Xander's, Xander doesn't know he's Obnixilis. He knows him as the adversary. So,
right, and arguably the only other person who knows his name is Obnixilis is Elspeth. Or no, I suppose Vivian knows his name as well.
Elspeth, Vivian, Tezzeret, like the Planeswalkers know.
Yeah, but Tezzeret's not there, is he?
Tezzeret was there with Vivian.
Oh,
remember?
Yeah. Yeah, but I thought he left.
I mean, he might have, but he knew, like, you know, he would have been able to talk to Vivian about it or whatever.
Right.
But, yeah, and it depends, because Tezzeret left to go back to Elish Norn to continue the assignment for her or whatever. But, so we go back, and there are a couple of things I want to talk about here. First of all, I wanted to talk about the fact that, and there's a quote here for it, but Amy, you were much more upset over the damage to the items in the museum than to the attack on Xander himself, I feel like. No?
How do you figure?
Sorry. So, for example, when we were playing X-Men Legends 2, we were in these, like, Egyptian temples and stuff, and we're going around and destroying the walls and destroying items in there that are, like, artifacts or whatever, and it was just, you were very upset when ancient items are destroyed like that. So,
of course, there's no reason to destroy them. It's not like you're fighting them, they're artifacts.
Yeah, they're just collateral damage is the term I was looking for, sorry. Anyway, so I know. They're not actually. I know. So, for example, the quote here that we use is, pockmarks in his marble floors, because while he's being attacked, he's receiving pockmarks in his marble floors. The quarry for this stone was no longer in operation. His, by the way, he and his is Xander, his pristine haven would never be the same after tonight.
Right, so that's just a metaphor for the fact that he's dying. But also, it's a nod to the fact that, in my mind at least, it's a nod to the fact that the brownstone quarries in Connecticut were closed down in 2012. And those are the quarries that made all of the brownstone buildings that exist in New York City.
That are now becoming a lot more trendy again, and so they're going at least more recently,
well,
and they're going up in price. And
arguably, they never went out of style. I mean, when they first started being built, they were the cheaper version of things. You know, they started using the brownstone to compensate for not being able to afford using marble, right? And then they became indicative of the rich, as opposed to, you know, counter to that. But I feel like that happens as time goes by. But they kind of never went out of style because they're so just iconic for New York. And yeah, so I think that was a nod to, you know, saying what a shame it was that those quarries got closed down, and that kind of means that the brownstones that exist are the brownstones that will exist.
Yeah, I mean,
there will not be more.
We've discussed many times on this show and on our streams as well that, and some of our openings too, I guess. We are the maestros. These people are the maestros. Like my family grew up in New York City or were raised in New York City, helped to build New York City, like the Riveteers, and like this set is based off of. So like my mother and father, not knowing each other at the time when they were younger, but they both grew up in brownstones in the city.
Right.
So I heard about brownstones all the time. We had family even somewhat recently when, without giving names out, when Uncle John passed away. Mm-hmm. We went to his services, and then we went back to his wife's house, or his house, which was a brownstone.
Right.
That was like a few years ago. So we've been in brownstones recently. Like, you know, it's like Amy said, it's a big part of the culture, and it's a big part of my family's history, our family's history. Like, you know, it means a lot. And of course, here it's a slightly different connotation, but of course, as you said, it's used kind of as that metaphorical, like, kind of catch-all thing, so that it's not like, well, it's not the same because this is a museum. It's like, it's the same idea, like...
Well, and so I think, like, what this is saying is kind of like marble or all the artifacts in the museum is kind of like creating this sort of permanency, right? It's these things that are supposed to last and typically do. And then you've got somebody coming through who is just in the moment trying to do the thing. And they're coming in and permanently ruining this supposedly everlasting or immortal, if you're Xander,
sure.
thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it doesn't mean anything to them,
right.
Which I guess in their mind means it doesn't mean anything to anyone. Right? It's irrelevant. It's not, it doesn't matter to them, and so what does it matter? End of statement.
Period, yeah.
So I wanted to talk about that portion of the story at the museum. first of all, originally we had talked about like the maestros like not really getting a lot of respect in these stories. But I will say that's because like they were the only ones we focused on. Like I said earlier, if we found out that Rafine died,
right.
Who the hell cares? Like, he's a cool character, and if you identify with the Obscura, maybe you're upset by it, but
he's pretty cool.
Yeah, but we've heard like 2 sentences from him
right.
in all of these stories. Even Falco Spara of the Brokers, we learned more about him in the Rocco story. No, Rocco was the Rocks enforcer that we met. Whatever his name was, sorry if I didn't remember it, but he was from the Brokers. We heard from Falco Spara in the Brokers. Even if Falco were the one who died, it wouldn't mean as much if it were Xander, or than the fact that it's Xander. So, for that perspective, I guess it is respect to the Maestros, because they gave him the time to advance his character, to be somebody that we could care about. You know, we just take it more personally because our last name is so goddamn close to these guys. And so it's just like, why are they the ones getting shit on the whole time? I don't understand. But I did want to point out, I try to give credit where credit is due, because other times I, give crap where crap is due. So I want to give credit where credit is due for the art on Murder.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the inaccuracies of story spotlight cards.
Yes.
The art on Murder was perfect. Perfect. He's falling backwards off of a balcony. It's open air. You can see it. Nixilis is standing there, finger gun out. We'll talk about that in a second. But finger gun out, still smoking as well. Xander falling backwards, nothing in his hands, and finger claws.
Yeah.
On his hand.
I didn't even see that.
Amazing.
Cool.
I looked at that art and I was like, yes, that's that shit I'm talking about.
They did that right.
Because even if it is that they did the art first and then they put that shit in the story, good. I don't care what order it's done in, but it worked here. Right. So you figured out a way to do it. Keep that going. Nicely done. Amazingly done. I was so happy when I saw that. I was like, that is one of the most accurate. Some of them you could say, like, aren't super accurate because they're just, like, depicting it, like, from someone's recollection or something like that. But there are others that are just blatantly wrong and bad.
Yeah.
So, there's that. But this, I loved it. It was so good. So, I wanted to make a point of it. And so, speaking of that moment of him dying, this is not a quote, but just a summarization because it's something that we wanted to talk about. Xander is running away from his former allies, or his former subordinates even. First of all, they let him kick some major ass and get some awesome lines in of like, I gave you that dagger. You think I would give you a weapon that I didn't know how to stop? Amazing. So cool. Kicks all of their asses, all these vampires, turning them to ash left and right. And more importantly, using the museum to his benefit in that way. Because nobody knows the museum better than he does. And...
unless it's Elspeth, arguably.
Well, and Elspeth says that later on, yes. Yeah. But
sorry, I didn't mean to...
No, not at all. So he makes his way up to the viewing deck / balcony. They call it both things, so however you want to refer to it. He barricades the door and even takes a moment, or is able to take a moment, and remind himself how much he loves the view up here. He is able to have, if he's gonna die, this is the place to die.
Right.
Because he got to run through his museum, he got to take down some traitors in the process, right? If I go down, I'm taking you with me, is the line I mentioned to Amy earlier. Taking a page out of Andross's book from Star Fox 64. There's probably many other places where that line's been used. But it's the one I think of. It's burned into my memory. And then, using his knowledge of the museum, he goes through his baby one last time. I mean, they imply that he is its curator, he is the museum's father. And he goes through one last time and makes it to the viewing deck, to the balcony. And yeah, that was my point. Just like that is the place that he gets to choose for his final battle with Obnixilis. Like, he says that to Obnixilis, right? He says, you know, I figured if we came up here, we would be alone for our one-on-one. And he almost gets in there, but then doesn't. And just gets, like, killed. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say on that or not. But.
No, I feel like you left a lot out from what your reaction was to that part of it.
Oh.
Like, I just feel like what you said to me was, like, it really shows, and now I'm forgetting it too. Damn it, it was good.
It wasn't meant to be, I guess.
No. Remember it. Damn you.
Well, keep thinking about it, because I want to talk about something else, sort of related to that, but if you remember, let me know. I want to talk about the finger guns thing, because on the lighted up card art, it's funny. Here, the fact that Obnixilis, a demon planeswalker, uses finger guns to kill somebody, that's a little much, I think. But it goes along with the theme of the set, which is, you know, mobs in New York City, and they didn't need to put guns in it. Right? Wizards of the Coast is a company that operates here in America, and I don't know that I need to tell people, but there are, we have issues with guns sometimes.
A little divisive.
Yeah, a little. Just a little. So, if finger guns is their way of solving it, what can I possibly say about that, right? I don't need to see, and I'm not asking for, by the way, but I don't need to see Obnixilis holding a Tommy gun, right? I don't need that. I don't need him to see him holding a pistol. I don't. The finger guns just seem so goddamn lame.
Yeah, it's a
like,
little corny.
Corny is a better word. Thank you. A much better word. It's very corny. And it's, at first, like I said, with the light 'em up card, it's campy. Right. And I think that's fine. When it dips into corny territory, I'm like, oh god, it's just so weird.
Right.
But when I actually stop to think about it, it's like, what did I want? Right? Like, I don't want him to have a gun. And if they want it to be more thematic, you know, the only other thing
I don't think they needed to, but I think it was their way of kind of being like, hey, we don't do sets taking place in an era where guns exist.
Yeah.
So this one, they do. So I think it was their kind of way of being like, we should incorporate this because of that fact. But I don't know. I feel like it's a little silly to have done that.
I just think, like, I mean, there were people, right, who were talking about, there are certain things that are required to be in this kind of a setting, or this kind of a locale. And there were some people who were like, why wasn't pizza a thing? Like, pizza could have been a thing in this world. It would have been a nice, cute little inclusion or whatever. But if you're talking about the mob, how did the mob kill people? They threw them in the river with cement shoes. That's in the set, right? But that's not how they were going to kill Xander. It's guns. That's how the mob took care of people and took care of problems or whatever. I wouldn't have wanted to see them do guns. They didn't want to see them doing guns. And so this was their solution, was just the finger gun firing magic off. Okay. I think my point is, I think I have to forgive it because I cannot think of a proper alternative that still incorporates that aspect of the style of the set or the theme of the set in that way. So I think it's silly, but it's better than if Obnixilis had a Tommy gun or a pistol or whatever. Personally, that's how I feel about it. But then Xander's dead. It happens. It sucks. It makes sense. Because Obnixilis has to show his, like that next step in taking over the plane, kind of sparking this start of his invasion out in the open, so to speak. And we'll see where it takes us in Story 5 in 2 JaARs, 2 weeks or two episodes from now. But obviously there's still more to go because we haven't gotten to the majority of what we're going to talk about now that we're back to the crescendo. We're back to the Cabaretti slash the Ventaleon. So here are some quotes that we wrote down because that's basically what the majority of the rest of this is just, excuse me, quotations from the story so that we can discuss what that means. And again, mostly Amy can, but I'll throw my 2 cents in where it's appropriate. Giada. There's fighting going on. Ginny runs off to go get Jetmir, and Giada, forgotten, inched toward the back of the stage, gloved hands covering her mouth in shock.
Yeah, I wanted to include that quote because the thing that's tricky about this story is it has a lot of descriptions that tell you things without saying them. So I had him write down like all of this stuff because instead of just saying this thing is this, it's giving you a whole paragraph of description so that you can come to the conclusion that this thing is this. Does that make sense?
I think
so. So we kind of have to unpack each of these. So this one is saying, okay, she starts out a victim, right? Because of course she does. She's an abuse victim. And that's how you're groomed to be by an abuser, right? She's forgotten because the people who are supposed to be looking after her don't care about her. They care about the resource that she can provide.
Right.
So instead of them actually paying attention to her and making sure that she's safe, they forget about her because they only care about what she can do for them.
Which is ironic because the literal next thing that happens when Ginny runs away is that it seems like 2, I don't think they said 2, but it said the Cabaretti that we're moving the big bottle, drop with it full of Halo, drop it, it breaks and spills everywhere. And then it's all gone.
Yep.
So it's like, hope it was worth it, assholes. And the other thing is, Giada also was spent because she had just, like, expelled, if you will, all of that Halo. So it's not like she could have just been like, oh God, and just run away. She was exhausted at that point. Like,
well, and that could have been part of the reason, too, why she was being somewhat left alone. Because nobody was like, oh, I can just drain her of Halo right now.
Yeah.
She didn't have any left.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they weren't lapping it up off the floor, to be perfectly honest.
That would be, that's like the vampires in Crimson Vow if blood had spilled on the floor or whatever. So then we get to the point where, I mean, Elspeth is watching all of this, and as we heard, Elspeth knows, like, okay, that's messed up. Why is nobody else thinking this is messed up? And so now she gets upset, like angry upset, as opposed to just like shocked and appalled upset. Now she's angry. And so she is kind of pushing her way to the stage where Giada has been forgotten, has been left alone. Because she's not going to be alone for long. There are other people who have now realized that she is on her own,
right,
and they're going after her.
They'll see that as an opportunity to snatch her,
yep,
and have control over the Halo that she can provide.
That's right. And again, especially in her, not that we've seen her as a fighter in any capacity, but especially in her exhausted state, probably very little, if anything, that she could do to prevent that, even though, like I said, we haven't seen her as much of a fighter to begin with, so not really something that I would have anticipated regardless.
Which is why they specifically said her gloved hands, right? Like, covering her mouth.
Yeah.
You know, it makes you think of, you know, those old movies where the lady is screaming, you know, for her life.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's already gotten her gloves out of the glove box, you know, and,
Yes.
you know, fastened the scarf over her head.
That's right.
You know, she's in the convertible with the bad guy who she doesn't know is the bad guy yet, right? And then,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so whatever.
Right. Or just stands there frozen in fear as opposed to like leaving the situation. Just like,
Yeah.
yeah. So the next line is when Elspeth does eventually, fighting people off or whatever, does eventually get to JaAR, and I guess I'll let you talk about it instead of like, you know. Elspeth gets to JaAR and says, "JaAR," Elspeth said calmly, despite the rising chaos. She knelt down before JaAR, looking into her dark eyes, not unlike Elspeth's own. "Would you like me to take you from here?" JaAR inhaled slowly, the breath quivering at the end. "Yes." She spoke for the first time in what sounded like a hopeful manner. "I know a back door."
Okay, so let's kind of go through that line by line.
Sure. Okay, so
Yeah.
Sure. So the first line is, "JaAR," Elspeth said calmly, despite the rising chaos.
Right. So Elspeth had the ability to have the frame of mind to forcefully make her way up to JaAR.
Beeline right to her.
But then as she was approaching her, get very soft and calm and quiet and low.
Yeah, because we've seen in movies and media and stuff where a situation like this could absolutely just be somebody running up and be like, "Let's get the hell out of here," and like that's
grab the kid and run.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
It's not. No, and people need to know that. So in a situation where you're trying to deal with, especially a child, I mean, she's like
they say
teen.
They say teen is what they use. But I was saying they infantilize her so much, it's like super hard to tell, like, you know, what age she actually is.
Well, and that's the point, right?
Yes.
She has been, she's been taught to act as though she is younger because everyone treats her as though she is younger. Because they see her as a resource that they want to protect, and because they want to control her, so they take away her independence. But also, back to the line, yeah, I can't see that at all.
JaAR, Elspeth said calmly, despite the rising chaos.
Right. So she knelt down to get at her eye line.
Oh, that's the next.
To look at her in the eyes.
Okay.
And it specifically says, not unlike her own, right?
Yes.
To indicate that there is empathy there. Elspeth isn't doing that to assert control over her. She isn't doing that because she wants to manipulate her. She isn't doing that to just to convince her, like, hey, we need to do this right now. So you're listening to me, right? And then now I'm gonna scoop you up and take you away. You know, Elspeth is empathizing with her and being able to see herself in this girl enough to say, like, she doesn't deserve this. She needs to be helped and protected and taken away from her abusers. You can go to the next line.
Well, I was going to say, it's good, too, because that is implied here and it's then later stated kind of more explicitly as well, and we'll get to that.
What is?
The comparisons of that Giada is making, or Elspeth is making, between Giada and herself.
Okay. Yeah.
That it's more explicit later, but is very well read here, not unlike Elspeth's own. Like, that could mean a lot of things, as opposed to like, oh, her eyes are similar to mine. Like, no, that's not what that means.
No. It's her eyes have seen terrible things the same way mine have.
Yeah. So, the next part of the line, would you like me to take you from here?
Right. That line is great. So first she empathizes with her, then she gets down on her level, right? She calmly communicates. And then she asks if Giada would like to be taken away from there. She's making sure that someone who doesn't get consulted about things in her own life is now being able to give consent to escaping a bad situation instead of having to remain in it the way her abusers would force her to in a typical situation.
Or the opposite, which is still not good, which we were just discussing, of Elspeth running up, grabbing her, and just running away.
Right.
Which still removes her from the bad situation, but takes her autonomy out of it entirely.
Right. And arguably, a response to that would make sense from her would be to fear Elspeth, or to think that Elspeth is just as terrible as her abusers for snatching her up like that. Or to think, oh my God, like, I have to get back to them. How could you do this? You know, any number of things. It could be, you know, they'll get me back, and when they get me back, they're gonna beat me up, you know, or whatever. I mean, there's like a whole spectrum of things that could go through this child's mind. But when you are sitting there and actually physically asking them if the situation that they're always in, that's an unhealthy one, is one that they actually want to be in, then they know that that they can respond to you truthfully and say no.
Yeah.
As opposed to having to fear what might happen with anything that they say to you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. So the next line, or the next part of it, Giada inhaled slowly, the breath quivering at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, you know, she's in a traumatic situation.
Yep.
You know, she's clearly experiencing the physical side effects of the adrenaline rush.
Yes, and so then just says yes. She being Giada, she spoke for the first time in what sounded like a hopeful manner, and says, I know a back door.
Right, so this line's really important. It says that she's hopeful for once, and that's because somebody engaged with her, cared about what she had to say,
Or respected her at all.
respected what she wanted,
Yeah.
and was thoughtful enough to even ask in the first place. And then a result of that hope, this is the most important part, a result of that hope and that reaction being given to her, that autonomy being given to her, is a competency. She's able to say, oh, okay, now that you give a shit about what it is I have to say, I have something to say.
Yeah.
I can contribute. And what I can contribute is I know of a back way that exists. And that would not have been important in a situation where her autonomy was not acknowledged and respected and cared about. She wouldn't be able to make that contribution. And so that's just a perfect example of why it's important to do trauma work. Because when you are that victim, when you are that person and you're living in that kind of a situation, in that kind of an environment all the time, you don't think you have competencies. You still have them, right? She still knew where the back door was. But she didn't know that she had a competency until it was important that she knew where the back door was. But if nobody ever gave a damn what she thought or said or wanted or did, then she would never need to know where that back door was. So her knowing it would be irrelevant because it would never help her situation. Her situation was always terrible, right? And having those competencies were arguably a problem more than a help, because having those competencies indicates to your abuser what they can do to abuse you. So you hide those competencies and you forget about them. And so when you do trauma work, what you do is learn that those competencies exist. And you can't do that work until you can start to have hope about your situation being able to improve. So that's a great set of lines right there, because it's like if I were to look up in the dictionary or on the internet or whatever, because the dictionary is just definitions. But if I were to look up on Google, like, what is the reason why doing trauma work is important? The answer could be that paragraph, you know?
I also think it's interesting because Giada actually gets that moment to be in charge, or to, I should say, to lead. Literally, to lead the two of them out of that bad situation. And it's not Elspeth appeasing her and saying, you seem weak and you seem like you need this win, so I'm going to just take you out. Or like adults do sometimes, like, oh, really? Where are we going? Why don't you take me there? It's actually like, this is a serious situation. You say you know what you're doing. I trust you. Let's go. Show me.
Yeah, and she wouldn't have a concept of being capable of getting them out of the situation that they're in if Elspeth hadn't come to her.
Yeah.
Treating her as though she was capable.
That's right.
And, yeah, so that's the whole point of the competency thing. If that's, like, too terminology-ish for you, it's simply just having the capability to do something about the situation, and Elspeth not making her aware, because she's kind of like always underlyingly aware of it, but like making her able to act on that capability by treating her like she has that capability, as opposed to treating her like she isn't capable of doing anything.
Right. So we'll move on to the next section. Kind of Elspeth mentally examining Giada and kind of analyzing what Giada's life must have been like, or must be like. Says she, meaning Elspeth, she supposed Giada had seen far worse throughout her time with the Cabaretti. The thought filled her, or do you want to go line by line or just read the whole thing? No. Okay. The thought filled her with a profound sorrow. Giada was just a child. What had her life been like so far? Elspeth doubted it had been anything close to good. She knew a prison when she saw one, even if there were no bars and the wardens were dressed in sequins and gold.
Right. So this paragraph is just a great way of saying she is an abuse victim. She's in an abusive home, basically, with the Cabaretti family.
Jetmir and Co.
Right. Jetmir and friends, I don't know. But, or perhaps Ginny and friends.
Yeah. If Ginny's like her handler.
Ginny's like her, like closer caretaker, I guess. But it's basically just, she's in this abusive home. She can't get out of it. There's nowhere for her to go if she were to leave. You know, these other families that also rule this location, you know, in partitions like that, are not safe places for her to go. And there's arguably nobody she can go to outside of those houses, aside from Elspeth. I mean, Elspeth is part of the Maestros. She pretended to be part of the Cabarettis.
Yeah.
But she's really not affiliated with any of these.
Right.
Which is why probably it makes it so much easier for her as this kind of outsider who doesn't care about drinking Halo constantly. She cares about, like, you know, being a good person and living life and doing what she is supposed to be doing while she's on this plane.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, like trying to find information for the Gatewatch, but also trying to learn about her home, possibly.
Right. But yeah, I mean, and Vivian too. I mean, they're here to do a job. They're not here to get drunk on Halo, or to rule New Capenna, or to have a fight with whomever, you know.
Now, all those things describe Obnixilis, but
right.
not Vivian and Elspeth,
right.
Definitely.
So, like, they don't have a reason to want to use her for her resource and value that they can get for her Halo that she can make.
Like I said,
you know,
wring her out like a sponge.
You know, because arguably even, like, trying to get money from the other people on New Capenna who do care about that and would probably pay big money for Giada, what do they want that money for? They don't.
Nope.
So...
No, because the second they go to another plane, it doesn't help, and they don't need or want to stay here.
No. Because why would you? You know, especially if you're Vivian. Like, oh, God.
Green walkers don't usually like technology-based planes.
No.
Right? We learned that with Nissa on Kaladesh, although Nissa was able to find her way, but that's a whole different situation. But.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've said everything about that paragraph.
So then we get to the next section where they make it outside, they kind of stop the people that are pursuing them, except then we see, like, the adversaries, people that are pursuing them have now been stopped and or killed, whatever the situation may be. I think that's when Vivian shows up, I guess, to save them. But then Like a door opens, a door flies open, and Ginny runs out, and Jetmir runs out, and a couple of other Cabaretti run out all together. And for like a half a second, I was like, ooh, this is bad. And then I went, no, it's not. They, they're not working for the adversary, right? And yet, my first instinct was correct. It's bad.
What are you talking about?
Well, because JaAR was always with them in the first place, but it's a bad space to be in, and so this is where we get this coming into this next line. If you have anything to say, go for it. Okay. So the next line, the next section, is when Ginny basically says, "Oh, Elspeth, great! You kept JaAR safe. Cool, bring her over here." And Elspeth's like,
Nah.
I've been over this already, right up here, and like through here, and so the paragraph of the section begins. Under no condition should she, Elspeth, ever bring JaAR back to these people who would use and imprison her. But it wasn't Elspeth's choice.
Okay. Now, I was interested to know where they were going to go next with this. Because they could have said, well, it's the Cabaretti's choice. Or it's...
I was going to say, I thought for a moment it's the Maestro's choice or Xander's choice, because Xander was the one who had given Elspeth the directives to be there. Or whatever, what to do while she was there. So, Elspeth locked eyes with JaAR, trying to communicate without words. Did you know that it's super difficult to write in italics, by the way? I don't know how to do it, but all of the things that she is thinking...
something you attempted? Just underline it.
But that's underlining. That's different. Anyway, all the things that she's thinking at JaAR were written in italics, and I was like, how do I do that? So I just wrote everything squiggly that's in italics. It looks real dumb and bad. It's really bad.
It's so cute. It's like all the letters are like wavy.
It looks real bad. Anyway, so it says, I will do what you desire, she thought, but didn't say so outright. She wasn't going to boldly go against the Cabaretti before knowing JaAR's wishes. What do you want? Or what do you want, I guess would be the proper emphasis of that statement. JaAR's hand slipped into hers, and she gave a light tug, much like she had when they'd started her flight.
Right. So this is great, because I was not thinking they were going to go this way with it, but I'm so glad they did. No, it's not Elspeth's choice. It's not Xander's choice. It's not the Cabaretti's choice. It's JaAR's choice. And Elspeth was going to honor that, just like she did before. And, this time, she couldn't ask JaAR what she wanted to do. She just needed to sense into JaAR, and JaAR needed to give her a sign back. And so the sign was, I'm going to take your hand and start to pull you away from them.
Yeah.
That I don't want to go with them.
Yeah. Which is just what she had done inside when, like I said, she became the leader. That's how she led Elspeth around. Instead of yelling what they were going to do or whatever, they're running in the back trying to get away, and JaAR is pulling her in the different directions of which way to go. So it's like their own little version of their own secret language, so to speak.
But it's not really. It's just simple body language kind of thing. But because they have that mutual respect, they can have that open communication and understand what the other one means.
Right.
Right? Because if it were Ginny is not going to be able to sense into what JaAR wants. Not that she would try, because she wouldn't care to.
No.
But if she did care to, she wouldn't be able to.
And in fact, speaking of Ginny, that's the next quote. And it's like one line away from that last one. But basically, realizing, oh, she's pulling me backwards, Elspeth's like, oh, we're good. We'll meet up later. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before with the abuser tries to mask their true nature behind smiles and sunshine, basically. Like, oh yeah, I'm not a threat. Like, I love this kid. And so then if, in this case, the kid or any other person that's the abuse victim tries to say, hey, they're not a good person, like they mistreat me, blah, blah, blah. The response that they may get is, what are you talking about? They're amazing. Like, they're so nice to you all the time. And Elspeth said earlier, right, it's like a sister, she would think it was a sisterly relationship, but she could sense in to the vibe that Giada is giving off at all times, and so knows that it's definitely not that at all.
Right.
So, for example, this line says, Ginny's usually jovial nature began to slip away. Skip a line. No one climbed as high as she did in New Capenna without leaving a trail of blood behind.
Right. Because all of a sudden now she's saying, no, bring her to me.
Give her to me.
Because she's my object that I control, as opposed to a person with her own goddamn free will.
Yep. Yeah. And in fact, then this is how we get Elspeth to this next portion where Vivian now, it's Vivian, Elspeth, and Giada, and they're all together kind of trying to get away. And Vivian implies to Elspeth, like, listen, these families are fighting each other right now. Like, we need to figure out what's going on. Elspeth's response, I don't care about the families right now. I care about a young woman who's in danger. Then, thinking again, more of my dumb squiggly lines, who deserves so much more than she's ever gotten.
Yeah.
Do you want me to keep going or stop?
I mean, there's not much to say about that. That one's actually self-explanatory.
Just, actually blatantly stated because
it
should be.
And because it's already explained it without explaining it earlier on.
Yeah.
That she's an abuse victim.
Yeah.
And that's really what that means, is that she didn't deserve to be an abuse victim. Nobody does. And Elspeth was going to do something about it if she could.
Yeah. And then we go back to the discussion of, like, Giada's eyes being like Elspeth's eyes, right? That was where it was sort of metaphorically stated. Here's where it's blatantly stated. Elspeth would have given anything when she was trapped and helpless for the first years of her life to have someone fighting for her.
Right.
No one had been there then. Filling that role for Giada now felt like breaking a cycle. Like giving hope to the scared, trapped girl that still existed deep within Elspeth's soul.
Right. So instead of doing parts work, she was helping a little girl on the exterior. Instead of, helping her own inner child who was a trauma victim, she was doing what she could to help another little girl not be in that situation any longer, if possible. And
does that work that way, sort of? Like, if you're, not necessarily like she's cured, but just like the idea of Elspeth's inner child kind of seeing or sensing that that's occurring and knowing, like, oh.
That's a tough question.
Because good, I'm glad I did it.
No. But not no. Right?
Sure.
So...
there's not a bright line rule for everything. What the hell? When it comes to the human psyche.
So when the self is doing things like saving an abuse victim, your child part that was abused isn't really there. Like, it is, but you know, if the self is kind of in control at that moment, then your traumatized child part is not. That doesn't mean that it's completely unaware. But it also doesn't mean it is aware. And that's why it's important to be able to start to sense into your parts and ask them questions to find out what they know. Because they're a part. So they only get bits and pieces of the reality of you. So the picture isn't clear. The picture, you know, or it's a puzzle that's unfinished. And a lot of times parts will, and not so much a child part, but other parts like a manager part or something like that will be like hyper aware, or they'll be so unaware. Like they'll assume that you're still a scared little kid that they're trying to protect, when in reality you're 30 years old.
Yeah, you're a grown adult. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you talk to them and you say, I'm 30. I am not, you know, 6.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, and then they're like, oh shit, I didn't know.
Yeah.
You know.
I've just been in here the whole time. You know,
Yeah. So, no, they don't really know. But the thing is, you tell them. And you give them reasons to trust you enough to allow you to ask them questions and interact with them and ask them politely not to do the thing that they do anymore, because it's not important anymore. It's not what is needed. You know, you basically say, like, no, I'm an adult now. You know, I can take care of myself, or I can, you know, take care of this situation, or I'm not the helpless child that you think I am. And so you don't need to do those things. And so that means you're free to do what you would like. Instead of like being forced into this role that you probably don't want to be in, because it sucks. So you just kind of like tell your part, like, hey, I did this thing, you know, I saved this little girl and she's a lot like you, and you know, here's why. And you know, I was able to take care of her and help her and get her out of that situation, and she was able to do it herself too. And so isn't that something that you would like to do? You know, and then the part will answer back sometimes. You know, a lot of times it's like a nonverbal kind of thing, but you can kind of sense into how they feel or whatever.
Right.
And so then you kind of establish a trust and are able to communicate with your part and say to them, like, these are the things that are the reasons why, like, you don't need to do this anymore. What would you like to do instead? Because then, you know, if the parts can realize that they have this endless potential to do whatever they want, then, like, you're absolutely gonna realize, since you have the self,
Yeah.
and they don't, right?
Yeah.
You're absolutely gonna realize that you have this endless potential to do whatever you want, right? And if the parts listen to you, then you absolutely can. Like, it's proof of that capability and potential, right? So, yeah.
Okay.
That got way more complex than pretty much anything that I think I've ever talked about on this show.
A lot of firsts today.
Yeah.
The longest, or a lot of, the most of whatever. That was a lot, but I in no way think that it wasn't warranted, right? I think it makes perfect sense that we discussed it. I didn't have anything else to talk about with this story.
Was that the end?
That's it.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
At least that's the last of what I wrote. I'm definitely interested to see where we go from here. Elspeth went to go get a weapon. Kind of is like, okay, I don't have to pretend that I'm not who I am anymore.
Right.
Let's get this shit done. And we've got one more episode of the main story, but of course, with the way that we're doing...
Well, hold on. Elspeth went and got a weapon, and then Giada said, okay, I can stay back with Vivian, because she remembered that she was capable, because Elspeth reminded her that she was capable.
Right, because at first she was like, I'm going where you're going.
Right, like, I need to do that. No, you don't. You're going to be okay here with Vivian, because we trust her, right? And I need to go do this other thing that isn't safe.
Yeah.
So, you stay here with Vivian, because you got this, right?
Well,
But Elspeth didn't need to say any of that.
Yeah, correct. It didn't say any of that, yeah.
Because the gears could then move in Giada's head to go through that and figure it out without Elspeth having to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Because Elspeth already did with her actions. And so Giada was like, okay, yeah, no, you're right, I can do this. And they just went their separate ways, and it was fine. I mean, there was more to the story after that. But.
Sure. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this gets tied up next week. Truly. Not next week. The next mainline story. But as we've been doing things here on JaAR, the next story that we review, which we would like for it to come out on Monday, but there are no promises. The best way to find out, not because we're trying to screw you over to force you to do it, but truly because we have lives and things come up and we apologize, but also we're trying. The stories got released the way they did, and that's not our choice. So here we are. We're trying, truly trying our best, and thank you for sticking with us as long as you have. We would like for it to be out on Monday, but regardless, the next story that we're going to review is side story number 4. This was main story number 4. And then we're going to do main story 5, side story 5, and then there are 3 other story things that have come out recently that I'm not going to talk about here, but you will see in the coming weeks what we are going to be doing. Maybe at that point, Dominaria United stuff will start coming out, and I'll want to shoot myself in the head, but we will have to see... And we will just do
the finger gun, right?
The finger gun, yes. Yeah. We will do as much as we can.
Yeah, we're gonna try. We'll make our way through this,
yeah.
And we'll attempt to stay as on track as possible, so that you're not having to watch these videos 80 years after the stories come out. We're doing what we can. We're only human.
Speaking of, yes, that is definitely, God, I'm reminded of that all the time. As a reminder, as we said, the day after this video comes out is the premiere stream for our first ever Nuzlocke, and it's specifically Pokemon Fire Red. We would love it if you could join us for that. If not, don't forget the VODs are going up on Video Games for All, link down in the description box below. Don't forget to sub and ring the bell there. We've got Pokemon Amy's first time through Pokemon Gen 3, Pokemon Sapphire specifically, every Tuesday. Final Fantasy VII, Amy's first time ever seeing Final Fantasy VII, or any Final Fantasy for that matter, on Wednesdays, and every Sunday, with those sick-ass thumbnails, we've got our first playthrough for either of us of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. I, as an attorney, I mentioned I'm brokers as well as the maestros, but... I, as an attorney, and Amy, as my wife, we go through that game together for the first time ever, and we haven't really gotten there yet. We're getting very close, but whoo boy does that game get tilting. So definitely stay tuned for that as well. Tune in for those thumbnails. And as with anything that we do, especially here, but really with anything that we do, we want to know your thoughts down in the comment section of whatever video you happen to be watching. For this one, we want that conversation to keep going. Did you like this story? Did you get any of that when you were reading it? Did you notice any of that like trauma through line there? Is it because you've been watching our show and it's something that you keyed in on? Or is it something that you might have personal experience with? And if that's something you're comfortable sharing, you're more than welcome to do so. We would love to hear from you.
Right, or if you would love to, if you would like to ask questions or just elaborate on some of the stuff that we've talked about in this episode or any episode of JaAR, please
Agreed.
Leave it in the comments.
Yes.
We are more than willing to get back to you.
Yeah, keep that conversation going with us, with your fellow commenters. It's being able to see yourself in a story, see your situation in a story, and to be able to maybe pass some information along to help others out is a really great way for you to join us as we show off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. You know, ironically, I say that I think the finger guns are corny, but because of the whole, like, pointing with one finger is rude, I do finger guns at the end of every JaAR.
You do?
Every time when I talk to the people, I go like this.
Oh.
Every time. Anyway, speaking of that, let's end this particular episode. I really, really hope that everybody enjoyed it, and thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and yeah, like Amy said, or like we said, any and all feedback that you have about the story itself, our review of the story, the format, etc., we want to know. That's what the comments are for. Please do not hesitate, and as always, come join us on stream. You're welcome to... Right. We don't typically talk about... Like, I will occasionally be like, oh, this is what I'm doing in Magic, but we are talking about whatever the chat wants to talk about 99% of the time.
Right.
So come in, ask your questions about whatever the hell you want. We're here for it. We would love to hear from you. It's
right, or come in the chat and say, I want to talk to you more about trauma stuff.
Sure.
But I don't feel comfortable leaving it in the comments because I want to get more detailed about my own experience, and I just don't want it to be that public. That's fine.
Sure, we will find a way to make that work.
Right, we will figure out how to contact you in a more private manner.
Yeah, private Twitter, messages, email, whatever the case may be. We will make that work, don't you worry.
And that goes for any topic, really. Maybe you want to know more about how to start a YouTube channel or something like that.
Sure.
Pop in the chat, let us know, and we can get back to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's something that... I've said this a million times, and it has never come up, ever. But I always say it to protect myself, or ourselves. If it's something that we find too personal, we will politely let you know that, and we will move on. That's really all that it is. But like I said, it literally has never come up.
It goes both ways. You know, if I ask a question in response to something you've said, you know, don't feel pressured to answer me if you think it's over the line.
Yep.
And sometimes it'll occur to me that it might be, and so I'll say, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
Yeah.
You know, but that really goes for anything, right? So
as always. So yeah, the comment section, the chat in our live streams, whatever the case may be, keep in touch. We want to hear from you. We also have, I mentioned Twitter, we also have our socials linked down below as well, so you can get a private message to the Facebook group, or you can, I think you can DM us on Twitter. I think they're open. If not, you can always tweet at us and say, hey, follow me, I want to message you.
Right.
And we'll do what we can. So, yeah, that is going to be the end, as I said, of this particular episode. Thank you so very much for being here.
Yes.
And for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.